Hey guys, welcome to episode 33 of the Redeeming Productivity Show. This is the podcast that helps Christians get more done and get it done like Christians. I'm your host, Reagan Rose, and I have with me here, if you're watching the video, my co-host, Watson Thomas Rose, who is 1 year old. One other small difference you might have noticed, besides the baby who is helping me co-host, is that my hair is very short. You know, we're in the middle of this quarantine, and I had the bright idea that, hey, Kim, what if we cut my hair real short because no one will see me during this, and we can see what it would look like if it's like buzzed real short. Great idea, except for the fact that I forgot that I make videos every single week and that people all over the world get to see my ridiculous haircut. Well, Kim, after she cut it, cried, and she described it as, quote, "You look like Britney Spears when she had that meltdown and shaved her head," which is accurate, if not very hurtful. Thanks, Kim. We've got a good episode for you today. I did an interview with Chris Reiser, a pastor out of Tennessee, and we talked about productivity, how it relates to sanctification, which is, a huge topic for this program. And we even talked about technology. We're in the midst of this pandemic right now, and talking about the excellent contribution from Watson there. Wow, he is very thoughtful. Is that all? And we even talked about how Christians are utilizing technology right now and how we might even take lessons from what we're doing right now and bring them into the future, and how we minister to others and how we glorify God with our lives, and just think about technology in general in terms of our productivity and our sanctification. So it's a great episode. I'm excited to bring it to you. Just one thing before we get into it. Remember, if you are listening to this and you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. We bring a new episode every single Monday, Lord willing, and you can subscribe on any of the major podcast players or on YouTube. And yes, and if you do that, then you'll get the newest ones brought straight to you every single week. All right, well, without further ado or further commentary from Watson, let's get into this week's episode. This week, we are joined by Chris Reiser. Chris is the pastor-teacher of Grace Community Church in Maryville, Tennessee. He holds a Master of Divinity from the Master's Seminary and a Master's in Biblical Counseling from the Master's University. And pleased to welcome Chris to the show. Welcome. Good to have you.
It's great to be here. Looking forward to our discussion today.
Absolutely. Me too. So, Chris, I got connected with you through one of your congregants, Jessica, and she had told me a little bit about your habits and pointed me to a series that you'd done on productivity at your church for a men's group or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I listened to the whole thing. That was a couple weeks ago, but I really appreciated it. And I think we're kind of probably kindred spirits in how we think about that. And so I thought it'd be neat to have you on the show and talk to you a little bit about how Christians approach our work and getting things done. And couldn't have anticipated the strange kind of times we're in right now with the pandemic and the virus and the lockdown, which I think has presented its own unique set of productivity challenges. So I want to talk about that with you a little bit too.
Sounds great.
So maybe, I covered kind of a little bit about your education. Maybe tell me a little bit about yourself and about your church, how long you've been there, your family, that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. When I finished up a Master of Divinity in Biblical Counseling in 2004, we came directly here to Maryville, Tennessee. You got to say that right. Maryville is one way to say it, but if you live here for very long, you got to say Maryville.
Maryville.
That's right. It took me about 5 years to get there. It sounded fake otherwise, because I am not a Southern boy in any way. I'm from mostly West. Grew up in Arizona. Lived in California for a while, in Colorado. A little bit of time in Missouri. That's the closest I ever got south or east. So I came in 2004 here. So I've been here for 15 years, just a little over that. It's the first time I've been a lead or a teaching pastor. I was in youth ministry for about almost 10 years full time before that in Missouri, but had not had this kind of position before. And so it's been a great blessing, a tremendous learning experience as well. I've been married for 30 years this year to my wife, Elisa. We have 4 children. My oldest son, Josiah, is 24. Then I have a daughter, Joanna. She's just turned 16. She's driving, and all that's new to us. And then I have two adopted daughters from Haiti, Marie, who is 13, and Selena, who's 11. They've been with us for 10 years this year. What a joyful addition to our family. And that's a whole nother story. Been quite a challenge, but a great joy just to welcome them and have them be part. So that's, I guess, kind of who I am.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, congratulations on 30 years of marriage. That's a big milestone.
It is exciting, and it gets better. It truly does. And yet there's always challenges. So.
Absolutely. So what got you interested kind of in the subject of personal productivity that made you even want to do this series you did with the men at your church?
You bet. Really, when I was about 26 years old, I just entered into full-time ministry as a youth pastor in Missouri. One of the elders of our church gave me a book called Holiness by J.C. Ryle. And as I was reading the book, I was out in Southern California visiting my brother. I remember us sitting beside the pool, and I'm reading the book thinking, there's only one thing really. I mean, as a believer, I love the Lord by His grace. It's only one thing that's keeping me from really pursuing holiness, and that's that I'm lazy. I'm just not pursuing it the way that I need to, because I'm not putting in the effort. Obviously the Holy Spirit He actually does the change, but you have to put in the effort. That part of it is a partnership work. And so as I was sitting there, I really entered, I guess, personal productivity really through the avenue of knowing that I needed to be more holy, and knowing that I wasn't going to do that unless I was able to change my routine and be more disciplined. So that kind of started a lifelong pursuit then of just trying to refine my schedule and do things in a way that would enable me to pursue the word and pursue the ministry the way I needed to. When I came here, one of the primary things I wanted to do as the teaching pastor was to work with our men to help them essentially do the same thing. If you want to be holy, you've got to be disciplined. 1 Timothy 4, 8, that we discipline ourselves for the purpose of godliness. And so the series, I did it in a variety of formats, and then most recently the Iron Man format, our Monday morning, because I just have a passion to see that men would know how to pursue holiness in a way that will enable them to actually progress rather than just wish they were holy, but really think through it well. So that's really the impetus of the Ironman program and most of what I've done there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. My interest in personal productivity came from a similar place. Reading, I think for me the big thing was Edwards has a sermon on the preciousness of time and the importance of redeeming it, and that just hit me so hard. And then any book on personal holiness, sanctification, that connection, it's not a hard leap to go from, okay, I want to be more godly.
Right.
What do I need to do?
Absolutely.
So I definitely appreciate that angle on it. Maybe talk to me a little bit more about the relationship between sanctification and personal discipline or productivity, because I think just from talking to folks, there's a lot of, in the church, people who misunderstand sanctification. There is some of that Keswick kind of let go and let God, which would be, they would call what we're talking about legalism. They would say, oh, trying to put effort into it, you're being legalistic. So how would you answer that, or how would you describe that relationship?
You bet. And I would run into the same consistently. And it was one of the things early on that I had to wrestle through. So how do you work at this? Do you just wait for something to happen if the Spirit of God is doing it? And so I think as I studied and worked my way through it, those, some of those passages I mentioned, you got the 1 Timothy 4, 8, which is as you discipline yourself, and just what that word actually means. It's effort involved there. To discipline yourself means that you are actually doing something. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 13, you have work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who is at work in you. So as I worked my way through it, beginning to not be afraid then of the effort involved, because Scripture over and over says you're going to have to put yourself into this. Really, with further on in 1 Timothy, where Paul tells Timothy that you are to take labor with this. You are to be diligent in these matters. Give yourself wholly to them, so that everyone can see your progress. So just seeing all the scriptural exhortations towards effort, but then realizing and working my way through, so that effort is my part, as it were. The actual change through that effort that's what the Spirit does. I can't manufacture that, but I have to, scripturally, I have to be in a place where that change can take place, which means the Bible has to be before my eyes. I have to be in places where I'm hearing the truth. And so that's where the personal discipline, personal productivity comes in, to manage my time well, so that change that only the Spirit can do, my schedule and my life is directed towards seeing, allowing that to be the greatest change possible. So as people say legalism, essentially what I'll say is, well, I mean, it's obedience. So the Bible says obey, and that's not legalism. That's obey, because that's what God tells us to do. And that it would be legalism if I said, I am doing this and I'm manufacturing the change. Look at what I've done. That's legalism, where you're saying, it would be the same for salvation. Look what I saved myself. I did these things to be saved. Well, sanctification, similarly, not exactly the same, but where if I did all these things, I would be saying, I'm the one that made myself sanctified. So I think that's been super helpful for me to help that with guys, to say, I'm not telling you are changing yourself. I'm saying you are doing what Scripture says, so that the Spirit of God will renew your mind. Ephesians 4, He does the renewal. You are putting in this effort. So it's not legalism. It's joyful biblical obedience.
Great answer. I so appreciate that. That's spot on. Spot on. So maybe a little bit about, even you've talked about you're 26 and how you kind of got into personal productivity and all that. What are some of the things you're doing now, just from a practical standpoint, to keep yourself organized and make sure you're actually, getting things done and completing tasks and routines are happening?
Sure, and I'll give full disclosure up front. All of anything I'm doing, I stole from somebody else. So none of this is unique to me. In fact, probably it's most recently the things that I'm doing have been prompted a lot by Tim Challies' book, Do More Better. Mm-hmm. I also read Matt Perman's book, What's Best Next, and so a lot of those things I just tried to cull from that. And so, kind of a three-prong approach to enabling myself to be more productive. One is to have a good scheduling routine. So I use a calendar app on my iPad to make sure that everything that I'm supposed to do is gets on that schedule. That's personal, personal time in the Word. Then meetings that have to be done, study time. I try to block out my time. We can maybe talk more about the specifics of that later. But so the calendar, where I put everything that I as I think through a week, everything that I need to do, I try to think through a month, the bigger picture events, things like that. So calendar. And the next part of that is a good to-do list, essentially. So I use To-Do-List, which Challies recommends, because it's really versatile. What I love particularly about that, and I think most of them do it now, but there's these repeating tasks that you can do. So I have a whole series of categories, and then, for discipleship and for family things. And so I have these repeating tasks that come up every day to say, do this, do this, do this. Incredibly helpful, because I remember about a quarter of that stuff that I'm supposed to do. It's, and he suggests, Charlie suggests, look, put on there that you're supposed to check your schedule. You think, who needs to put on that check your schedule? But I'll get up in the morning and I'll forget to check my schedule and I'll miss a meeting. It's crazy. So To-Do-List is kind of the next part of that, and super helpful. And then the last piece that I use, also recommended by Challies, is a kind of an information organization program. So I use OneNote, Microsoft, where I can have a bunch of categories, and things that I need to do, information that I need to remember, try to just plug everything into that. and get that organized so that I can find, if I'm working on a project, if I've got a sermon that I'm working on, a lot of that information is found there. So kind of those three pieces help me remain productive or try, and then I analyze each of those. How well am I using a tool? Am I actually, accomplishing what I need to do with it? So those are kind of the three-prong approach that I use most often now to be productive.
Yeah. And you mentioned blocking out your schedule. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? You talk about time blocking.
You bet. So as I look through a week, essentially, I want to, and really kind of then that's through the month. And so I'm looking to see, okay, relationally speaking, with people that I need to spend time with, I want to be blocking out those meetings. And so I'm looking at discipleship things that I'm doing, and I'm getting those set in. And probably first, I'm looking at as a lead pastor, teaching pastor, I've got to study, and my week can get so cluttered up so quickly that I just don't block out the time to study. And then I'm doing it all Saturday night, and my family's not happy. So putting in the study times really first. That's what I do first. Then I'm looking for administration time. I have to have time to plan things and to contact people. So that goes in. Then I'm looking for meeting times, placing those meetings in. And then I try to leave some lag time, some leeway for the unexpected things. And again, most of that's, that philosophy of it is just, I took that from people who do this well. But that's really been helpful. And then events are kind of the next thing. Those are on, you're going to, the youth group's going to do this, or, so those things are part of my schedule as well. So that's kind of how I look at each week. And then I adjust that each week based on if I have more people to meet, if an event is going to take more time administratively, I have to lengthen that period of time, while always, and I don't always do this as well as I need to, trying to keep my study time pretty consistent.
Yeah. And do you have other pastors at your church or elders, or do you have people that you can kind of help share the load with, or even delegate to?
Yes, definitely. So I have another full-time associate pastor, and then a part-time youth pastor, and we're an elder-led church. So I've got 4 other elders. So as far as getting all those things done, another part of that administrative task is handing off the pieces of the week or events that need to get delegated out. I'll have to say I'm learning. It's been 15 years. It's actually almost 25 years in full-time ministry, and delegation still is, doing that well it's a great skill, and that I'm still working on. But so part of what I do is trying to figure out who can take what piece of the things that have to happen, and then trying to keep accountability with that. How's that actually go?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you use, this is a little bit nitty gritty, but just out of my own curiosity, one of the things I use a similar tool set, and one of the things I've found difficult is with working in a team and trying to delegate things and having to jump out of that tool set to kind of give, you hand off a task to somebody,
Right.
and then it's no longer in your task manager, for example. And then you're having to remember, okay, I need to follow up because it's not going to get checked off automatically for me. That kind of thing has been a perennial challenge for me. I was just wondering if that's been an issue for you too, and how you've addressed it.
That definitely is a challenge. And I've tried things like, when you're using Outlook, which I also, that's email side of things. I didn't mention that. That's another piece of trying to keep things organized. But so I've tried where you do the group, the meetings that show up on both or tasks, and that's never worked well. I just never have gotten it to work. So the thing that I'm trying now is in my Todoist, when I hand off something, I'm trying to put in a repeating reminder, check with so-and-so about this thing that they were supposed to do. So it either stays on my task list or pops up at various times. That's the most effective thing I've probably ever done. And that's only very most recently, if I hand off something to the elders, or if I've, Ron, my associate pastor, has got something to do, that has actually been pretty effective because it keeps popping up and it says what task I'm supposed to be checking on. And then it just reminds me that I need to check with them.
Oh, that's a really great idea. I'm going to steal that from you.
It's worked well. So
Yeah. So you just check it off and then it'll come back up a week later, whatever the interval is. And then you just
absolutely.
delete it or stop the repetition once the thing's totally done.
Yes.
Wow. That's great. Yeah. Wow. Look at that. I'm going to write that one down. Appreciate
Hopefully
it.
hopefully that will work for you. It's the only thing I've found that actually helps me there.
Mm-hmm. No,
Besides just
absolutely.
like a piece of, essentially, something I've written it down and, hey, check what's wrong about this. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the tough thing is too, I think you want to, everyone, how they approach getting things done is going to be unique. Like some people
yep.
prefer to do a pen and paper. Some people are going to like the same tool set you're using, but trying to force everybody to use the same tools, sometimes it can be counterproductive for everyone, because there's like shared
Yeah.
spaces where you can do things like that, where you can delegate. And I know that there's even software systems they sell at churches now that try to help, you to organize everything.
Right.
But the downside is people lose the autonomy to kind of do what works for them and how they keep track of stuff. So I like the way that I like your approach to that. That's clever.
And the Lord is gracious. And as you said, my staff is very different. Elders are very, very different. And so if I try to automate some of that stuff for them, right, I'm harming their productivity because they're trying to match something that they just don't like.
Yeah.
It doesn't go well.
No, absolutely. Why do you think with pastors? I've had an inordinate amount of pastors on this podcast because that's just kind of the circles I travel in. And I always ask this question about why is it you think that it's especially important for pastors to be diligent about personal productivity?
I think there's a couple of reasons. I think the generally the nature of the task is such that you have a whole bunch of time that you can allocate in any way. No one is directly telling you, except that you got to show up on Sunday and preach. That's, you got to be there, but you've got a whole week worth. You've got all these hours that no one tells you exactly what to do with. And in seminary, they do their best to even try to tell you how to do that. But then you've got all this time. Now it gets used quickly, but nonetheless, it's all yours. And so if you don't have some of these tools, what happens is your time gets away from you. So I think it can lead to laziness where it is, and sometimes not even purposely, but if you have any tendency towards this, it's going to be easy just to put off things and to not work hard. I think that's one thing. I think the next thing is that because there's so many different things to be doing. You're studying, which is kind of intensely personal. You're trying to be with people. You're trying to administrate, which you have varying gifts or skills at. That all the different kinds of things you have to do, if they're not carefully managed, then you get out of control in one area or another. It's not like you're just doing one thing that is pretty much the same all the time, so you don't have to manage it. So I think that all that time that has to be allocated that nobody tells you what to do with, like you don't have to show up at the office, as it were, at 8:30. There's not a class you have to teach, again, except Sunday or maybe some other thing. So if you're a teacher, you have to be there. But if you're a pastor, you don't have to go see somebody at a certain time. And then I think the ability, and I think the other thing is the time it's always incredibly valuable. It's valuable for everyone. But there's an accountability built in, or should be, with pastors, that they're people, if you're paid, and not everybody gets to be paid as a pastor, but either way, you need to use your time well. And so it's good stewardship of the time and the money that your people are so graciously providing you, that to use it unwisely it's a travesty. And so I just think that's another piece of it. I need to be accountable to the people who are being so gracious to free me up to do this. And so being productive, having these things, is essential to do that as well.
No, absolutely. As a pastor, you had talked about you doing this Iron Man thing where you're working with the guys, and you've done some of those on productivity. I did college ministry for a number of years. I lead Bible studies now mostly, but one of the things as a minister that is frustrating is you want to see your people growing and you want to see them maturing. And especially, like you said, the men in your church. You want to see the future elders of your church being raised up, the heads of their home. You want to see that. And as we've talked about, we know a big part of that involves them taking responsibility and being diligent with how they use their time. If you could give one thing to the men in your church, or the men who are listening to this, or the women too, what's one thing that you would tell people in terms of how do they manage their time, or one task they could be doing, or one routine they could be doing that you think would most benefit them as they grow in maturity into Christ?
So I think this is what you mean. At the outset, if I could say, look, if you're going to get a hold of this, well, what's one practical thing you could do? And that would be to track your time consistently. In fact, I start this way. We do a lot of training for ministry and guys that are going to go into ministry as well. And really, in nearly every place, I start with this. Look, you take your time, look at it in 15-minute increments, track that, to see what you're wasting, what you're using, and then consistently go back to actually tracking not just what you say you're supposed to do and that's on your schedule, but what you actually do. I found that, as practically speaking, and I think that's answering your question, the thing that I would say, start with that.
No, that's really helpful. Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting at. One of the things I think was a huge indictment against me is I have an iPhone, and maybe it was been a couple of years now since they came out with the screen time feature, and it would send you a report on like Sundays. Good. No, it's because when it tells you like you've averaged 2 hours a day on your phone, you're like, no, I haven't. There's no way that I actually have, but it's not lying. And that's only just that one part of your screen time on the phone. But I think that we are notorious. People are notorious for being overly optimistic about how we think we're actually spending our time, right? And when you actually track it, yeah. When you compare what you think that your schedule's like to actually tracking it, that's a wake-up call for sure. That's good advice. That's really good advice. One of the things we were talking about a little bit before I hit record on this is, of course, we're in the midst of this pandemic. A lot of people are locked down. I know that Tennessee is now, or you're the county north of you, and you're expecting your county is going to be locked down soon too, right?
That's correct. Yep, Blount County.
And so a lot of folks are having to utilize technology, and churches too, in a unique way. I mean, you're having elders meetings, I expect, over Zoom, and everyone's looking like fighter pilots.
It's been quite fascinating.
Yeah, I don't know if you've had time to reflect on that much, but I just, the whole thing to me is very I think there's some encouraging aspects to it, to how we're leveraging technology, but I guess what I'm getting at is, a lot of times Christians, we kind of will balk at technology as mostly a vehicle for distraction, which it is a lot of times. I just talked about my screen time usage,
right?
Or even a vehicle for sin. But right now, it's just fascinating to me. The Lord has seen fit to have us being in a time where we have the ability to connect in ways we never have before, with video calls and all kinds of things, and staying connected. So have you thought through that at all from the standpoint of how, even on the other side of this pandemic, Christians might learn from what we're experiencing and better use the tools that the Lord's given us for fellowship and even for ministry?
You bet. In fact, I just had a discussion with a guy over Zoom, a Zoom discipleship meeting I was doing about this very thing. There are the dangers. So I talked about that last night, and to my teams, you've got to make all these excuses now because, I have to be on, got to do Zoom. My youth pastor said I had to do that, and then I can click on the YouTube video, whatever. So the dangers have always existed there. But really, already we've begun to discover that particularly for leadership things, I've been looking for a way to get kind of not just the deacons or the elders, but some of our core leaders and then everybody together to talk through, what's going on. And so on Monday night, we used Zoom to get all the key leaders in our ministry together in one place, one screen. We've got the Brady Bunch. That's kind of the new theme. And it was tremendously effective because they could just be at their home. They don't have to all get where they need to go. You don't have to drive. So already we're kind of noting things as leaders to say, this is something we'll do afterwards. That is, it's not just the kind of brand new, shiny Zoom's fun, let's do that, but that it's actually going to, I think, in that sense, going to make us more effective. And I think even on the discipleship end of things, while certainly we don't ever want to get away from face-to-face being with people, but where there's difficulty in that, where it's just, you're not going to connect with somebody because your schedules are not, you just can't find a physical meeting time. These kinds of technologies, my plan is to really work hard to help people realize the benefit while warning them of the danger. So we're already trying to work through how this, and we really think it will benefit us from a communication, a leadership, and I think even a discipleship standpoint, without over mechanizing it, turning everything into, I'm not going to meet you, let's do Zoom. I think we can use it well without giving in to the things that make it less personal.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I'm right there with you. And I think of like the Apostle Paul, we have his epistles, and we see that he had a writing ministry, but he often to the churches was talking about longing to see them face to face and actually being with them, and that there was something especially beneficial of being there in person. And so right. I don't think you can replace that with technology, but I do think you can supplement it to a degree and increase those number of touch points you have with folks without being subject to some of the limitations of place that we have in our busy schedules.
I definitely agree. I think we can use it to add rather than subtract. And I think that's the danger. If it starts to subtract because it's, hey, staying in my jammies and doing my thing is a lot easier. But that's a problem no matter what we do. So using it, I don't think is the problem. It's just making the additions, because the more we can contact and touch base, the better off we are. So I agree. I just think that's the way to use it wisely.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, I really appreciate you taking the time this morning to come on and talk about these things. I know I've already going to steal some of the things that you've been talking about, borrow liberally and implement them in my own life. And I'm sure that it's been beneficial to those who are listening. Prayers for you and for your congregation in this unique season of ministry. And we'll just keep trusting the Lord and see what comes next with all of this.
It'll be amazing to see what the Lord does. We have a unique opportunity. I'm looking forward to just using it well. We only get one shot at this crisis, so we want to use it to the Lord's glory as best we can. So it's been a privilege. This is a passion for me. As I said, everything I've told you that's good, someone else told me. So I'm just stealing it. But thank you. It has been a privilege to talk through these things. I love doing it.